Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and this is Voice of the Global South. All right then, let's get started. On the show this week, the war within Trump's war room, with Trump's hand-picked aides either resigning in protest or contradicting key justifications for the Iran war given by him. The civil war inside the White House just goes nuclear. How countries in the global south are adopting innovative and sometimes extreme measures to save fuel as the Iran war drives up energy prices. And Kenya arrests a Chinese national for smuggling, well, ants. Saturday, 21st of March, day 22 of the Iran war and the beginning of the fourth week of hostilities. Here's the latest. Iran fires missiles towards the US base at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, southwest of India. It demonstrates significantly enhanced long-range strike capabilities that far exceed previous assessments. Also, it shows a willingness to strike remote strategic assets beyond the Gulf. Iran's supreme leader delivers a written statement read on state TV on the occasion of the Persian New Year. In it, a defiant Mojtaba Khamenei reiterates that the Strait of Hormuz would remain closed. He vows to continue Iran's nuclear program and promises revenge for the killings of Iranian leaders. President Donald Trump says that the U.S. has militarily won the war already and that he is considering winding down operations against Iran. Israel carries out strikes targeting the Iranian Navy in the Caspian Sea for the very first time. Notwithstanding Trump's claim of considering winding down military operations, his Secretary of War is seeking a whopping $200 billion to fund the Iran war. The U.S. Department of War has told American lawmakers that the war cost $11.3 billion in the first week alone. This request for an infusion of funds comes after Secretary of War Pete Hegseth said, and I quote, "It takes money to kill bad guys." 6 U.S. allies, including the UK, France, Germany and Japan, say that they will help in efforts to ensure safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz. And this is what U.S. President Donald Trump had to say when asked by a journalist whether he plans to send American troops to the Gulf. Take a listen.
No, I'm not putting troops anywhere. If I were, I certainly wouldn't tell you, but I'm not putting troops.
But what's making news and making heads turn everywhere from New Delhi to New York is how the U.S. government's justification for the Iran war, that Tehran was an imminent nuclear threat, is being shredded from the inside. President Trump's national counter-terrorism chief, Joseph Kent, resigned in protest on 17th March. His resignation letter is blunt. He claims that Iran posed no imminent threat to the U.S. and that Washington, D.C. was misled into war allegedly by Israel. And therefore, he says, I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Now, Kent is a veteran soldier, a decorated Green Beret and a lifelong Trump loyalist who is now saying flat out that Iran was not going nuclear as alleged.
On the verge of getting a nuclear weapon?
No, they weren't, 3 weeks ago when this started, and they weren't in June either.
Then came the bombshell from Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence. In a tense hearing before a committee of lawmakers, Gabbard admitted in writing that Iran's nuclear program had been obliterated in June 2025 and that Tehran had since made no efforts to rebuild it. Incidentally, in an oral submission, she omitted the line containing this specific fact about Iran's nuclear program. Mind you, Kent and Gabbard were handpicked by President Trump himself. They both now contradicted his core narrative. While President Trump claims that Iran was weeks away from a nuclear bomb, his own intelligence chiefs are saying that the threat did not exist. These are documented cracks at the highest level that directly contradict the White House line. It comes on top of President Trump's MAGA allies from the Make America Great Again movement opposing the Iran war. Remember, last week we told you about how for the first time his own base, the MAGA faithful, is starting to push back. Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Walsh, these are people who helped build the Trump brand on the promise of ending forever wars. Today, they're calling it a betrayal of the America First principle. They say that this isn't an American war, it is an Israeli war that Washington, D.C. is simply funding and fighting. What all this means is that top Trump aides are now openly jockeying for the force and exit strategy. This is the first real look inside the biggest U.S. military operation since Iraq 2003. And it shows that the Iran war is already politically toxic in U.S. domestic politics. Now, Kent's resignation and Gabbard's buried admission provide a powerful narrative about a manufacturing war, echoing the 2003 Iraq weapons of mass destruction controversy. So, was the Iran war triggered by outdated or even fabricated evidence? Some, like a former chief of the UN nuclear watchdog, Mohammad al-Baradei, think so. He tells the Middle East Eye online news that the Iran war is illegal and echoes Iraq. Clearly, the ghost of 2003 is back again, and how? Now, it's not just Americans who are skeptical of President Trump's motives. Oman's Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi is unsparing in his criticism of the U.S. for launching what he calls an unlawful war on Iran. In a signed article for The Economist on 18th March, Minister al-Busaidi writes, "It was a shock but not a surprise when on February 28, just a few hours after the latest and most substantive talks, Israel and America again launched an unlawful military strike against the peace that had briefly appeared really possible." The article is titled, "America's Friends Must Help Extricate It from an Unlawful War." In it, Minister al-Busaidi says that a deal was possible and nearly finalized in Geneva just hours before the US and Israel attacked Iran on 28th February. Remember, Oman played a key mediating role in facilitating high-stakes indirect talks between the US and Iran in Geneva, Switzerland. The negotiations had focused on Iran's nuclear program and reduction of regional tensions. Now, Minister al-Busaidi describes the Iran war as the greatest miscalculation by the US. For someone whose country was targeted by Iran, the Omani minister shows remarkable equanimity when he writes, "Iran's retaliation against what it claims are American targets on the territory of its neighbors was an inevitable, if deeply regrettable and completely unacceptable result. Faced with what both Israel and America described as a war designed to terminate the Islamic Republic, this was probably the only rational option available to the Iranian leadership." Meanwhile, West Asia, the Middle East, as some would like to call it, is no longer just on edge. It has well and truly plunged into a high-stakes energy war that is shaking the very foundations of the global economy. Israel hits the Iranian side of the South Pars gas field. Iran hammers the Qatari side of the exact same gas field. President Trump warns that he will massively blow up the entirety of it if retaliation continues. One field, two attacks, three countries. Let's delve deeper into it. Iran launched a retaliatory strike targeting Qatar and other Gulf countries. This after Israel hit the South Pars gas field, the crown jewel of Iran's economy, on 18th March. Now, South Pars is no ordinary gas field. Shared by Iran and Qatar, it is the largest natural gas field in the world. For Iran, it's not just an asset, it's the backbone. It provides 75% of Iran's natural gas and fuels 80% of its electricity grid. Hitting it was a direct blow to the regime's economic lifeline and its ability to fund the war. Iran's response was swift and brutal. It has since targeted Qatar's Ras Laffan, the world's largest LNG hub, Kuwait's Mina Al Ahmadi refinery, which caught fire following a drone strike, and Saudi Arabia's Riyadh refinery, which was targeted by ballistic missiles with shrapnel falling near the facility. As the hardware of the global energy grid burns, the human cost is mounting, and the weapons being used are sparking international outrage. The most chilling development? Reports that Iran has deployed cluster munitions against civilian populated areas in Israel. An Iranian ballistic missile equipped with a cluster warhead struck the central part of Israel. A cluster bomb tore through an apartment in Tel Aviv, killing an elderly couple who couldn't make it to their shelter in time. So what is a cluster bomb? Think of it as a mothership missile. It opens mid-air to scatter dozens, sometimes hundreds of smaller bomblets over an area the size of several football fields. Why the outcry? Because they are inherently indiscriminate. They don't just hit a military target, they blanket an entire neighborhood. Even worse, many bomblets fail to explode on impact, turning into de facto landmines that kill children and civilians years after a war ends. In other words, they scatter small explosives over wide areas. Many fail to detonate, and they keep killing civilians long after the fighting stops. Is it illegal? Now, under the 2008 Convention of Cluster Munitions, more than 100 countries have outlawed them. But the key players in this current conflict, the US, Israel, and Iran, have not signed that treaty. While not outlawed for them, their use in civilian areas is widely considered a violation of the laws of war. Is this a first? Hardly. These weapons have a dark history. Russia used them in Ukraine, the US used them in Iraq and Vietnam, and Israel used them in Lebanon in 2006. But Iran's use of it marks a massive escalation in the technical sophistication of its missile program. Meanwhile, Tehran is reeling. Since the war began on 28th February, the Iranian leadership had been systematically targeted. The list of high-ranking figures killed is unprecedented. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed in the opening strikes on 28th of February. In the last week alone, 3 key figures were killed. Ali Larijani, the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council and former Speaker of Parliament, Ismail Khatib, Iran's Minister of Intelligence, and Gholam Reza Soleimani, the Chief of the Basij Volunteer Paramilitary Force. Now, the decapitation of the Iranian regime's top tier has left the country in a state of degraded but intact survival, according to US intelligence. And with that, we come to the end of our cover story. And all that's left for me to say is thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, rising tensions in West Asia are no longer a distant headline. They are now being felt in homes, streets, and economies around the world. From longer fuel queues to rising transport costs, its impact is beginning to hit everyday life, leaving governments racing against time to prevent a full-blown energy crisis. Aman Kumar Himanshu reports.
At the center of this crisis is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow but vital artery of global energy located between Oman and Iran. It connects the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. Nearly a fifth of the world's oil and a large share of liquefied natural gas pass through this waterway. Large volumes of oil flow through the strait, and very few alternative options exist to move oil out of the strait if it is closed. Now, with disruptions intensifying, even a slight slowdown here is enough to send shockwaves through global markets, pushing prices higher and forcing nations to take urgent steps to conserve fuel and manage shrinking supplies. Disruptions here have sharply reduced shipments, sending fuel prices soaring and forcing governments into urgent conservation measures. For countries heavily dependent on imported oil, the impact has been immediate and severe. Governments are adopting austerity policies, rationing fuel, and encouraging behavioral changes to stretch limited supplies and prevent economic instability. In Sri Lanka, the government has introduced a 4-day work week to save fuel. Wednesday has been declared a public holiday. Until now, the country followed a standard 5-day schedule. Fuel rationing has also been tightened, with priority given to essential sectors of the economy. The move reflects the country's vulnerability after the 2022 economic crisis, as rising energy costs threaten to derail recovery efforts.
We recognize that there is an established culture within the public sector where citizens regularly visit offices to obtain services. Therefore, in order to manage this while maintaining service delivery, we have planned to designate Wednesday as a public holiday. Our objective is to maintain continuity. If the public service were to remain inactive for 3 consecutive days, that period would be excessively long and could lead to a disruption to its functions.
On the 15th of March, Sri Lanka switched to a digital QR code-based system to ration fuel sales as a precautionary measure amid persisting uncertainty in West Asia. Sri Lankans last used a QR code-aided system in 2022 when the island's economy crashed, resulting in critical shortages and long queues for fuel. Consumers are required to register and download a QR code specific to their vehicle for use at fuel stations. Weekly quota for cars is limited to 15 litres and 5 for motorcycles. Sri Lanka imports all of its oil and also buys coal for electricity generation. Officials said that the country's petrol and diesel reserves would last about 6 weeks, and they warned that any disruption to fresh supplies could severely affect the island. Pakistan, whose economy is in shambles, has cancelled its National Day parade and all associated ceremonial events for the 23rd of March. The provincial government of Punjab state has slashed petrol and diesel allowances for government officers by 50% and cut off official fuel supplies for ministers. Pakistan, which relies on 85% of its energy coming through the Strait of Hormuz, has introduced online classes for schools. But the deeper impact is being felt on the streets. For Pakistanis, the crisis has quickly turned personal. Families observing Ramzan were struggling to prepare Sehri and Iftar meals as energy shortages disrupt daily routines. Petrol and diesel prices have surged by 55 Pakistani rupees per litre, while household gas supplies have sharply declined following the suspension of LNG shipments from Qatar.
Before the war, the rate was good. In Turbat, which is a border area, we used to get petrol for 150 rupees. When we would come here, we would make a profit of approximately 40 to 50,000 rupees per vehicle. And buyers would also be found quickly, which is why the vehicle would empty quickly. But now, after the war, we are getting petrol for 190 rupees per litre in Turbat.
Japan started releasing crude oil reserves to counter surging prices and supply disruptions. Prime Minister Takaichi Sanae announced a plan to free up roughly 80 million barrels of oil, the nation's largest reserve ever, representing 45 days of domestic consumption. India has diversified its sources of crude oil to 40 nations, up from 27, to strengthen energy security amid geopolitical tensions. India relies on imports for over 80% of its crude oil needs. The government has implemented other initiatives to boost domestic oil production and reduce dependence on foreign crude. Similar economies are taking more immediate measures. The government of Nepal has issued fuel-saving directives to ministries, restricted the use of official vehicles to essential services, and consider an odd-even rule for private vehicles. Bangladesh has focused its energy-saving efforts on protecting its vital garment industry, which is the backbone of its economy. To ensure that factories have enough power to remain operational, the government has initiated scheduled power blackouts across the country and announced holidays for universities to save energy. In Thailand, TV news anchors ditched their suits during a morning show segment, in keeping with the latest government measures to save energy. Government officials have been ordered to reduce consumption of electricity in offices by switching off lights and electrical equipment when not needed. The government will also ask people to cooperate and encourage energy-saving measures such as carpooling. The broader economic outlook remains precarious. With Brent crude prices not coming down, analysts warn of a stagflationary scenario, a combination of slowing growth and rising inflation that could lead to a global recession. For many nations in the global south, austerity measures are not just temporary fixes. They are a desperate attempt to survive a structural shift in global energy markets. Aman Kumar Himanshu for DD India.
What's the smallest thing you can smuggle across the border? Most people think diamonds or drugs. But at Nairobi airport, authorities found something much more bizarre. 2,000 live queen ants tucked into test tubes. A Chinese national has been arrested for dealing in an underground market for exotic pet colonies of ants and fueling the theft of Kenya's rare species. Ayushi Ahuja goes inside the high-stakes world of insect smuggling and the network threatening our ecosystem.
What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word smuggling? Luxury watches, jewelry, currency, or narcotics, weapons, electronics? And now what's the smallest thing that you can smuggle across a border? Gold, diamonds, or drugs? What if the answer is ants? Imagine this. A man gets stopped at an airport. His luggage is checked, and inside, authorities find 2,000 live queen ants. Sounds bizarre, right? But this actually happened. A Chinese national, Zhang Kekung, was arrested at Nairobi airport in Kenya after officials discovered thousands of live ants hidden in his luggage, each one carefully packed either inside tiny test tubes or wrapped in soft tissue paper. But here's the real question. Why would anyone smuggle ants? Some may wonder, what makes ants worth the risk? Well, these aren't ordinary ants. Kenya is home to some rare species, especially the Mesor cephalotis, which is a type of large garden ant that collectors across Europe and Asia are desperate to get their hands on. And not just any ants, queen ants. Because one queen can start an entire colony. Yes, you heard that right. Ant colonies as pets. What may look like tiny specks in nature's design are now fueling a growth exotic pet craze. And that's where things get serious. Zhang wasn't alone. A Kenyan associate, Charles Mwangi, was also arrested. Together, they were found with over 2,200 ants without any legal permits.
There is a Chinese national and a Kenyan national, a Kenyan citizen. That is, the preferred charge is dealing in live wildlife species, not endangered, not protected, live wildlife species, contrary to Section 95C, without a permit. That basically they didn't have a permit. That is the charge they will be facing.
Authorities believe this wasn't just a one-time act. Investigators say Zhang may actually be the mastermind behind a larger trafficking network, but apparently escaped Kenya last year using a different passport. And this wasn't even the first case. Last year, 4 men, including 2 Europeans, were caught trying to smuggle thousands of queen ants out of Kenya. They claimed it was just a hobby, but the court didn't agree. So what's really happening here? Wildlife trafficking is evolving. Instead of focusing only on big animals such as elephants and rhinos, traffickers are now targeting smaller, high-value species because they're easier to hide, easier to transport, and much harder to detect. But the consequences, you say, not small at all. Ants play a critical role in the ecosystem. They help aerate soil, disperse seeds, and maintain the balance of entire habitat. So the next time you think it's just ants, remember, remove them and you disrupt a whole chain of life. Ayushi Ahuja's report for DD India.
And with that, it's a wrap. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.